I can't see everyone in class, but my name's Stephanie, and me and my colleagues are going to chat with you today about bird species at risk, EWSG. So, today we'll be talking, answering a few questions. Who are we? All of the new faces that you're looking at. What is biodiversity and why is it important? Talking a bit about the global decline in biodiversity, species at risk, and then talking about some bird survey work that's been done in EWSG and that will be happening in the future, and then also some local bird species at risk. So first, a little bit of an introduction. So I'll start with myself and then I'll pass it off to the colleagues as they appear on screen. So my name's Stephanie Varty. I'm a wildlife management biologist for the Eeyou Marine Region Wildlife Board, and the Wildlife Board participates in marine research in the region, but we also have responsibilities for wildlife management like polar bears and belugas. And I'll pass it off to my colleague Felix.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be joining you today. So that's me on the picture without the hat, but with a beard. So it's the same. A couple of years later. I'm also, just like Stephanie, a biologist for the Eeyou Marine Region, Eeyou Marine Region Wildlife Board. I've been working with the board since 2017. I moved here in Waskaganish in 2018. So it's going to be 4 years. And prior to that, I worked for about since 2008 or so, mostly in Waskaganish, being involved with environmental studies on the river and inland as well. So I did have a chance to work a little bit with youth on traditional knowledge transfer and learning back in those days in around Smoky Hill. And since then, I did work on a few bird surveys with Ted and other biologists and technicians. So yeah, I'm glad to be with you today.
And I see we just had someone join. Hi, Lisa.
That's Lisa. She's the principal in Waskaganish.
Oh, amazing. So Lisa, just so you know, we are recording. We've asked if anyone wants to join via video, especially if it's a student, we'll stop the recording. So we are currently recording. Let us know if you want us to stop, we will stop. And we were just introducing ourselves. So I'm Stephanie, nice to meet you. I'm in East Maine, and Felix was just introducing himself.
Yeah, we had a chance to meet a few weeks ago. So hi, Lisa.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
Then we'll pass it on.
Hi, everybody. My name is Natasha Ludit. I work for the Eeyou Marine Department at the Cree Trappers Association. We have an office and a department in each of our coastal communities. And I work very closely with Stephanie and Felix, like they mentioned, doing a lot of research in our marine area and wildlife management. I'm really happy to be here, and yeah, we'll have a pleasant afternoon.
Hi, everyone. I'm next on the list. My name is Ted Cheskey. I am speaking to you from Gatineau, Quebec, which is within the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I work for a non-governmental charity called Nature Canada, and I've been fortunate to work for Nature Canada for a number of years. I am a bird expert and the naturalist director with Nature Canada, and I've had the good fortune of working in some of the communities, mainly Waskaganish, but a little bit in Wamingi as well. Still have to visit East Maine, and organizing some expeditions to identify important bird habitat along the coast areas and meeting many people, and I'm always learning a lot through those experiences, and happy to meet people like Sanford, who's here as well, and my other colleagues. Thank you.
And then we have our real workers, the people who actually get out and participate largely in the research projects, are working in each of the communities. So I'll let them go in order of picture. We have two of them joining us today. That's you, Sanford. You're welcome to talk.
Hi, wajagam sa you usnizot. Msada Timnani Watawashkanshut. My name is Sanford Diamond. I'm the local CTA officer, EMR officer, and as they said, I'm the go-to guy. So basically, I organize everything locally here before they go out, before we head out as well, like into the projects. I happened to have the chance to meet with work with Ted, Stephanie, and Felix in the previous years, and Natasha is my supervisor. So she gives me the directives to focus on projects with Stephanie and Felix and Ted.
Thanks, Sanford. Derek, your turn.
Good afternoon. My name is Derek Okamau, and I work at the CTA in East Maine. And my job is the same as Sanford's. I'm an EMR officer, and I just help the biologists and scientists, and we do projects out on the bay, pretty much. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Derek. And so those are two of our officers, but we have one in each of the coastal communities, so Wominji, Chesapeake, and Wamoxtu as well. And this is our crew. We work together on research projects and management decisions and conservation. And so today I'm gonna give a little bit of background about ecosystems, biodiversity, and why it's important for protected areas. And then I'm gonna pass it over to Ted to talk a bit more about the bird survey work that's happened in the past in USG, and maybe a bit about bird survey work in the future. And hopefully we can get some of you interested. So the first big question is talking about what is biodiversity. And so it's a shortened form of two words, biological and diversity. It's talking about the variety of life that can be found on Earth. So all the different plant species, animal species, fungi, microorganisms, and the communities that they form and habitats where they live. And so you can really look at the importance of biodiversity in natural systems through a food web. Without diversity, without different species in the food web, it can impact our success. So imagine if there was only one type of fish and no other animals you could eat, it would put a lot of pressure on harvesting the fish. So luckily there are different species of fish and different animals humans can eat, and this is similar throughout the food web. So the more species and the more variety within the ecosystem, the healthier an ecosystem is, and it makes it more resilient to things like disease, climate change, and also harvesting pressures. So gives you an idea of why biodiversity is important to us, but also to the natural world as well. And so in the figure here, you can kind of see what somewhat reflects the variety in ecosystems up here. So we have people harvesting, there are seals, there are polar bears at the very top, and they're eating everything within the water, and they rely on different species, and those species rely on an array of different species, creating a really healthy, resilient ecosystem. But biodiversity, so what's happening to biodiversity globally? This figure shows that it's decreasing by an index value of about 68%. And then similarly in North America, we're seeing this great decline in biodiversity as well. So what that means is we're seeing a decrease in the number of species, a decrease in the number of populations in certain areas, and biodiversity is declining mainly because of habitat loss. So where certain species are living is turning from lovely natural areas in the south to things like agricultural lands. And then more relevant to up here, turning into things like mining areas or forestry areas. And so it's really decreasing the areas where species can live, where they can stop if they're migrating, where they find food, where they can reproduce. But there are also other factors, so overharvesting of certain species all over the world, invasive species and disease, pollution, and climate change. So all of these things together are creating a decrease in species, and it's really led to this need for a designation of species at risk. And so a species at risk is a plant or animal that's native to an area that's in danger of becoming extinct or disappearing from its current area. And so a few examples locally of these: certain populations of beluga and sturgeon, which we all know very well. And on the right, maybe one you might not be familiar with, but hopefully after today you are, the red knot. So shorebirds, there are a lot of shorebird species at risk. And so to give you an idea of how big the problem is of species at risk, there are currently over 521 plant and animal species at risk in Canada. So there are a lot of species that we're concerned about, and there are a lot of local species that are important for many reasons, for food web health, but also for harvesting as well. And I'm going to give you just a touch of the dry information about how a species at risk is given that designation. So there is a committee called the Committee on the Status of Endangered Species Wildlife in Canada, or COSWIC for short. And so this is a panel of experts that use scientific knowledge and traditional knowledge to decide which species are in danger. And the Government of Canada uses recommendations to create a legal list of species that gets protection. But the Cree communities and the organizations within the communities play a really big role in this process. So that includes the Cree Trappers Association, the Cree Nation government, and the Eeyou Marine Region Wildlife Board. So when the government decides to list a species as at risk, they have to come to the Cree organizations and ask them, will this listing impact any of your traditional activities? And they also have to ask, will this, or do you have any information on the species that can help us make our plan? So it's kind of a exchange of information, and also a question about whether it'll impact harvesting rights or other traditional rights. And to give you an idea of what endangered species rankings look like, we have extirpated, which are species that no longer exist in the wild. So the Northwest Atlantic population of the Atlantic walrus is considered extirpated. Slightly less serious, but quite serious, we have endangered. So certain populations of the red knot, threatened, so is likely to become endangered if nothing is done to help it, includes the Eastern Hudson Bay population of the beluga whale, and special concern, so is likely to be designated as threatened or endangered due to certain threats that have been identified, includes the lake sturgeon James Bay population. So as you can see, some of these species are really familiar and near and dear to our hearts. So it's kind of good to pay attention to the listings, because with them comes certain protection and certain opportunities to help save or conserve the species in the future. And so species at risk get certain amounts of protection. So in general, there's no killing or harming protected species, but I put a little with certain exceptions, because Cree and Inuit have harvesting rights for certain species at risk. So it doesn't impact that, but it means that people without status under the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement don't get to kill or harm species at risk. So let's try to protect them that way. No destroying habitat, so no development of habitats that are identified for species. And then the positive one, recovery strategies are developed to increase species populations and protect habitat. So this can include research, like surveys, to figure out where species at risk are, what important habitat is, but also new conservation measures to protect their habitat or restore it in the future. And the the kind of big question that I wanted to pose is, why is Eeyou Marine so important for species at risk? And so, as I mentioned before, species are at risk because of a large amount of habitat loss. And this map here shows the amount of intact wilderness all across the world. And you'll notice that in North America, especially northern Canada, and particularly right around where we are, is some of the largest extent of intact wilderness in the world. And so it's kind of some of the last opportunities to protect really pristine wilderness. And it's also complemented by the fact that there are people who care about the land here. So there are a lot of great opportunities to participate in these recovery strategies and participate in protecting habitat for the species, but also for our future. And for my portion of it, this will be the last slide, and then I'll pass it over to Ted, but just a little bit about protected areas and species at risk in our area. So to define protected areas, there are pieces of land that have been set aside from development, so forestry or mining, but it still allows for traditional land use and harvesting. And so as of December of 2020, 23% of Eeyou Marine was protected from development. And there's a goal to protect 30% of northern Quebec by 2030. And it's Eeyou Marine's contribution to this has really been instrumental for the Quebec government reaching their goals. They've protected an amazing amount of land in Eeyou Marine through the Cree Nation government, and these protected areas are important for the conservation of species at risk and their habitat, but protecting habitat for a species also protects habitat for other important game species. So for example, if you have a species at risk using the same habitat as geese, you get protection for some of that area from development as well. And also the presence of species at risk can lead to extra protection from development and funding for protected areas or research. So it brings money into the area. And the map on the right, you can see highlights all the protected areas in Eeyou Marine so far. And with that, I'll pass it over to Ted, and you give me cues of what you want me to show and when.
Sure, that area is going to grow, isn't it, Stephanie? Those
Yes.
Green areas, and then those areas also extend out into the ocean, into James Bay and Hudson's Bay, and they will. And I guess the only thing I want to add to your comment on this slide is that this is a global problem. It's not just a problem in the Cree Nation or in Quebec or in Canada. It's a global problem. It's a problem that all of the nations in the globe are facing. And there's general agreement about these targets around the globe of trying to get 30% of all of land and water protected by 2030. So this is the sort of thing where everybody has to sort of do their part, but the Cree Nation has certainly been a leader in Canada with this, which is really, it's setting a great example for the rest of the world, which is really really something to be very proud of. Your leadership is amazing, and it's one of the reasons why Nature Canada feels so honored to be able to work and support this in whatever little way we can. So I'm gonna just say a few things about my involvement here that I think are helpful. And one of the reasons we're doing this presentation to you today, and I hope everybody's enjoying it so far and learning something. And I wish we could be there and talk to you. It's weird to talk at a screen and then look into a camera and not see people. But we have been doing field work to find places where these species live. Sometimes they live there to reproduce. In the case of birds, call them breeding birds, where they reproduce, they make nests, and it's part of their annual cycle, and it's obviously a very important part. And sometimes it's places where they stop over during their migrations. As you all know, birds fly, they have wings, and they can migrate very long distances. And one of the examples that Stephanie put up there for the red knot, that bird flies all the way to the tip of South America every year to spend a chunk of the year, like several months, and then it comes back to the Arctic. It just passes through here. It doesn't stay here. It passes through on its way, say, to Southampton Island or even further north than that. But it stops here for weeks sometimes to build up fat so that when it flies, and sometimes it flies for several days without stopping, it's like gassing up at that, that gas station that's there. And if it's closed, you're in big trouble. So, but those habitats are really important, and it's important to know where they are so that when the opportunity to protect them comes along, that you make sure you get it right, because we know that the loss of biodiversity is a crisis, just as climate. We talk about the climate crisis as well, and the fact that climate's a warning. These are two things that are really tied together: the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis. And we know one of the ways of solving them is to protect more forests and protect species and that. So I'll tell you a little bit about the work we're doing, and then we're going to highlight some of the species. It's wish we could actually be out there seeing them, and maybe we can. Maybe some of you might decide you want to get out onto the land with us. Is this something that interests you? And if that's the case, we'll talk about this later in the presentation. But we'd love the opportunity to share some of this with you, and we know some people have a real interest in this sort of thing. So let's go to the next slide, Steph. Thank you. So I like this picture because this is a young man who just finished school. Like, he was transitioning to college, and he came out with us on one of our expeditions into the area out in Rupert Bay and some of the islands out there, Charlton Island, and that's Jeremy. And I wanted to put this one in just to give you a sense of what we do. We go out, when we do these expeditions, we work very closely with the tallyman, with local camps. We stay there. We have guides. We have people from the local community working with us. So there's always a few bird experts from the south and from biologists and that, and then local people with knowledge. But we very much rely on the tallyman and to know where the places are that we should be looking, and also people that can come along to the community to learn. So Jeremy came along, and we were looking for shorebirds. We'll talk about shorebirds later, which they like running along the sand and the mud and feeding there. That's where they get a lot of their food. But the land is connected to the water, and further in the land, of course, there's vegetation, and occasionally we encounter species that we weren't really expecting to see, but they might be species at risk as well. And you can see in the background behind Jeremy, there's a very big one. We always have to be very careful when we're encountering this one. So our guides in this case all have to be armed, and you can see there's a polar bear back there. And in the end, the polar bear headed off in one direction and we headed off in the other, and it wasn't a problem, but we got pretty excited there for a moment. But yeah, we would spend up to 10, 12 days out in these camps and basically survey areas as carefully as possible, count the numbers of individuals of every species that we observe. It means you get up early. These are long days. We walk sometimes 15 kilometers, 20 kilometers in a day through mud and over rocks. So it's a lot. It's hard work, but it's very, very rewarding. And along the way, you get a chance to stop and pick berries and learn a lot. Next slide, please. So Marc-Antoine there on the left, and there's George, who is one of the EMR CTA officers in Wemindji, also a counselor in Wemindji now. And George was an excellent guide and also very good at observing and identifying birds. Marc-Antoine is from Mont-Laurier in Quebec, but he's a very, very talented bird identifier. So we would see birds sometimes that were a kilometer away from us, and we need to count them. And so this is exactly what we're doing there as part of our surveys, is going out. We use telescopes and binoculars and notepads, and that's our basic equipment. And rubber boots, obviously, because it tends to be very wet where we go. Next. And this was a crew from I think when we were in Boatswain Bay. Does that look right, Felix? Yeah. So this, you see, there's a photographer. There's a few. There's John from Cheskey, and I think that's maybe one of the salt men, the camp owners there, who's with us also, who is one of our guides from the property.
Yeah, that's late Andrew Salt, I think.
Oh, okay. Next, please. And obviously a lot of boat travel. Our surveys tend to be around the bay, so we have to be very, very aware of weather, and sometimes we end up going to places where we can't get out because the weather changes. So being aware of weather, changing weather is so important, and the EMR officers, the EMR CTA officers, and the CTA generally is extremely well trained in that respect. The tallymen are so good at reading signs of the weather, because we have to, keep our safety and the safety of everyone involved in this sort of at the top of mind. But when we can get out on the land, this is the sort of day, nice calm day like this, where you can see things. And tides as well. Obviously, tides are very important to know when you can land a boat and not. Next, please. We're going to go
we have about 7 minutes left. I was wondering if you want to, we're going to go into the species now. Do you want to do the species and share the video as a link later, or share the video now?
We can share the video now. Let's do that.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah.
I will. So we have a video. I don't know, Ted, do you want to do an introduction?
Well, the video is it's on the Nature Canada website, so that's what I look like up close. And it tells the story to the world about the work along the that we're doing along the coast. So you'll see a lot more images and little video clips that'll give you a better sense of what it is that we do. And if you're interested in this sort of work, we're going to hopefully recruit 1 or 2 of you or more into this project in the future.
I'm Ted Cheskey, Naturalist Director with Nature Canada. This video is to tell you about a multi-year project that we are doing along the coast in partnership with the Cree Nation government, the Cree Trappers Association, Eeyou Marine Region Wildlife Board, and the 5 coastal Cree communities of Waskaganish, East Main, Wiminji, Chisasbi, and Wapmugstu. The project is called Finding Important Bird Habitat in the Coastal and Marine Zones of Iwichi. Climate change, pollution, resource extraction, and economic uncertainty threaten the healthy ecosystems and hunting grounds on which Cree communities depend. The Cree Nation government and Cree leadership, with the support of organizations like Nature Canada and the Nature Conservancy of Canada, have taken steps through the Challenge Fund of the Government of Canada to protect Cree territory from actions that threaten the culture in the area's rich wildlife populations. Over the next several years, these groups will work together to identify important cultural and ecological areas and protect them. It will be our work to find important bird habitat in the coastal and marine zones of Iwichi, with the hope that one day this precious coastline will be protected within a national marine conservation area. We know that the Eeyou Innu have very strong connections to local bird species, particularly game species like geese that are a staple in the Cree diet. Areas that support populations of culturally important species like geese, other groups of birds such as shorebirds, and species at risk by providing habitat as stopover sites during their migrations or as breeding habitat are considered important bird habitat. It is our goal to identify and protect that important bird habitat over the next several years. Since 2012, representatives of the Cree Nation government, the Cree Trappers Association, Eeyou Marine Region Wildlife Board, the Coastal Creek communities, the nature conservation charity Nature Canada, and Nature Quebec in the first few years have undertaken work to locate important bird habitat in the coastal zones and offshore islands of Eeyou.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Marc-Antoine. Je fais partie de l'équipe d'inventaire d'oiseaux, de dénombrement d'oiseaux. C'est mon 6e projet à Eeyou. On a pu inventorier cette fois-ci la région de Wiminji, les oiseaux de rivage, les canards et autres oiseaux. Avec 90 espèces cette semaine, il y a quand même beaucoup de variétés. J'adore le nord, découvrir des nouvelles places.
Our collective work focused initially on the marine zones of the Cree Nation of Waskaganish, including Winnipeg and its bays and islands. Local tallymen and other knowledge holders identified places important for different groups of birds and helped plan and guide expedition routes based on traditional ecological knowledge and review of existing maps of the area.
What the tallyman does is decides how many beaver will be harvested and how many big game animals to kill.
We've been island hopping. We've been in the bays looking for a different species of bird. We found close to 90 species of birds.
Shorebirds are one particular group of birds that is a focus of this work, as they have lost about 40% of their populations over the last 50 years and need conservation attention. Most shorebirds breed in the Arctic or subarctic and migrate south to spend their non-breeding season along the coastlines of the Americas, from Florida to the southern tip of South America. James Bay acts like a giant funnel, concentrating these birds on their southward migrations. They use the productive ecosystems along the coast of James Bay, particularly tidal mudflats, sandbars, and wetlands, as essential stopover habitat to feed and rest. They need to build up their fat supplies, which serve as fuel for their non-stop flights from James Bay to the Atlantic Ocean. Shorebirds belong to a group of birds from two main families, the sandpipers and the plovers. Sandpipers have relatively long beaks that can be curved or straight, along with relatively small heads, whereas plovers have short, stout beaks and relatively big heads. Both families have long legs for wading or running along a beach. There are over 25 different species of shorebirds that use the coast of Eeyou to feed and rest. Around the world, experts agree that the most important way to protect shorebirds is to protect their migratory stopover sites, making your coastlines critical habitat for this threatened group of birds. Our expeditions to survey birds last from a few days to 2 weeks. We work in teams that include many local people, from guides to field crew to tallymen to cooks to local youth. Within the coastal and offshore territories of the Cree Nation of Waskaganish, we confirm many areas of importance for shorebirds in general, and for 3 species at risk of extinction: the endangered red knot, the threatened Hudsonian godwit, and the special concern yellow rail, which is a marsh bird. During our work, we also mapped sites of importance for sea ducks, such as the black and surf scoter. These sea ducks molt the flight feathers at sea, where they form large rafts near feeding grounds rich in shellfish. Through this work, we were able to recognize and designate a new important bird and biodiversity area, the globally significant Winnipeg IBA, which filled a large gap in the distribution of IBAs along the James and Hudson's Bay coasts. IBAs are a program of BirdLife International, and they represent the most important places for birds on Earth. In 2016, with the support of Birds Canada, a partner conservation organization, we started installing Modus wildlife tracking receiver stations in some of the coastal communities and in remote sites along the Waskaganish coast. This new technology will help answer many questions that are important for the conservation of species at risk, like the red knot, by helping track their movements. Modus stations include tower-mounted antennae which are programmed to detect signals from up to 12 to 15 kilometers away. These tiny transmitters stay on birds for several months, emitting radio signals regularly, for example every 10 to 20 seconds. On the Modus website, you can see examples of projects and the detections of tagged birds, such as these red knots that were tagged in Delaware Bay, New Jersey, or on the western side of James Bay, and their movements to and from James James Bay and Hudson's Bay. The MODA station at the CTA office in Waskaganish has already detected several red knots migrating north to their breeding grounds from their wintering areas in southern South America. In 2019, we installed a MODA station in Wemindji and hope to place stations in each of the coastal communities over the next few years. Nature Canada and the Cree Nation government produced a comic book about Rufus, an endangered red knot, experiencing his first migration through your communities. The story takes him through Arctic breeding grounds on Southampton Island in Hudson's Bay to the southern tip of South America and back, an incredible 30,000 kilometer round trip. This brings us to the current work. In 2019, the Cree Nation government was awarded a multi-year grant from the Canada Nature Fund to identify new protected areas within the Cree Nation. The Cree Nation government is also participating in a feasibility study with the Government of Canada for the establishment of a national marine conservation area in parts of the Eeyou Marine Zone. As part of these projects, Nature Canada, in partnership with the CTA and EMR, is organizing coastal expeditions to identify important places for birds and species at risk, building on our work since 2012. This work began in Wemindji in 2019 with a 9-day expedition along the southern Wemindji coastal territory. We observed thousands of birds and even a few surprises, like this northern wheatear, a small songbird of the eastern Arctic and northern Europe that had never been observed along the eastern James Bay coast previously, until we found 2. Over the next few years, we hope to conduct surveys in the late spring and midsummer in the coastal zones of East Maine, Wemindji, Chisasibi, and Wapmugstu. These spring surveys will focus on breeding birds and summer surveys on migrating birds, particularly shorebirds. Dozens of species breed within the Eeyou, such as the rare and at-risk yellow rail that we detected in cabbage willows by tapping stones together that sound like this species' song. Perhaps we will have more surprises like we did in 2013 and 2014 when we observed dozens of American white pelicans flying over Rupert Bay. We very much look forward to continuing the important work. For more information about this work, contact your local Eeyou Marine Wildlife Officer or the Cree Trappers Association or Nature Canada.
Okay, and I see that Navjot had to leave, I think just because their class ended, but I'm going to forward all the content as well and send a big thank you. And I see Lisa, you're still here with us. So for you, at least a big thank you for staying with us, and we'll share the rest with Navjot, and we'll be sharing the presentation recording with the other classes from all the coastal communities as well. So thank you. Thanks to my colleagues. Thank you, Ted.